Have you ever looked at your life and wondered why it unfolded this way? Why certain people appeared when they did? Why some relationships disappeared before you were ready? Why doors you desperately wanted to open remained closed? And why the path you carefully planned somehow became a road you never expected to walk? Perhaps you have asked yourself whether there is any meaning beneath all of this, or whether life is simply a collection of accidents that you are supposed to survive. There are moments when life seems to make perfect sense. You feel connected, you know where you are going. The people around you seem right, your choices feel clear, and there is a quiet confidence inside you that everything is moving as it should. Then something changes. A relationship ends. Someone disappoints you. A plan falls apart. Your body grows older. A dream that once gave your life direction no longer feels like your dream. Suddenly, the map you are following no longer tells you where you are. And perhaps the most exhausting part is not what happened. Perhaps it is the endless conversation you have with yourself about what happened. You replay the past. You imagine different outcomes. You wonder what you should have said, what you should have noticed, what you might have done differently. You look at someone else's life and quietly ask why they seem to be moving forward while you feel as though you are standing still. You search for an explanation because some part of you believes that if you can understand everything, you will finally feel safe again. But what if peace does not come from understanding everything? What if there is another way of seeing your life? Imagine standing very close to a great painting. When your face is only inches from the canvas, all you can see are isolated colors. A dark mark here, a strange line there, something that appears unfinished. From that distance, you might even conclude that the painting makes no sense. But when you gently move back, something begins to appear. The marks that seemed random belong to something larger. Life can sometimes feel this way. We experience one moment at a time, and because we cannot see the entire picture, we judge the whole journey by the small piece directly in front of us. A painful ending becomes evidence that life has failed us. A season of uncertainty becomes evidence that we are lost. Someone else's rejection becomes evidence that we are unworthy. A delay becomes evidence that we have fallen behind. Yet perhaps these conclusions tell us more about our fear than they tell us about life. There may be a deeper pattern moving quietly beneath your experiences. Not a rigid plan in which you have no freedom, and not an explanation that says every painful thing was somehow necessary. Rather, there may be an intelligence within life that continually invites you back into awareness, back into love, back into the present moment, back into the deepest part of yourself that existed before fear began telling you who you had to become. You may have noticed this pattern already. Sometimes the relationship you thought you could not live without ends, and after enough time has passed, you begin to recognize how much of yourself you had abandoned trying to keep it. You had become so concerned with being loved that you forgot to ask whether you were living from love. You had become so afraid of losing another person that you slowly lost contact with yourself. At first, the ending feels only like loss. You resist it. You wish you could return to what was familiar, but gradually, in the silence that follows, another possibility appears. Perhaps the experience is asking you to see something that comfort allowed you to avoid. This does not make the pain unreal. Spiritual awareness is not pretending that disappointment does not hurt. It is not covering sadness with pleasant words. It is simply becoming willing to ask whether an experience can contain more than one meaning. A tree in autumn does not seem frightened when its leaves begin to fall. It does not reach after each leaf and insist that it remain attached. There is an intelligence in the season that the tree does not need to intellectually understand. It releases because releasing belongs to the rhythm of its life. You have seasons too. There are seasons when you gather, and seasons when you release, seasons when you feel certain, and seasons when you walk without answers. There are times when life seems to expand outward, and times when it quietly draws you inward. Much of our suffering begins when we decide that only one of these seasons is acceptable. The ego wants permanent summer. It wants certainty, approval, recognition, predictable relationships, familiar identities, and guarantees about tomorrow. It wants to know that the person you love will never leave, that your plans will work exactly as expected, and that nothing will disturb the image you have created of how your life should look. And when reality refuses to obey that image, the mind begins fighting with life. This should not be happening. I should be somewhere else by now. They should have treated me differently. I should have known better. My life should look more like theirs. Notice what happens inside you whenever the word should becomes an argument against the present moment. The body tightens, the mind accelerates. Peace disappears. Not necessarily because this moment is impossible to live through, but because you are mentally demanding that this moment becomes something other than what it already is. There is a profound difference between changing what can be changed and fighting what has already happened. You can learn. You can make new choices. You can leave situations that no longer honor your deepest values. You can speak honestly. You can create boundaries. But you do not have to carry an inner war with yesterday while doing any of those things. Yesterday's already entered the river. You can stand on the shore arguing with the water that has passed, or you can become aware of the water flowing before you now. And this present moment may be where the divine pattern begins to reveal itself. Not because you suddenly understand the entire future, but because you stop demanding that you understand it. There is something deeply peaceful about realizing that you do not need the whole map today. You only need enough stillness to recognize the next loving step. Perhaps that step is forgiveness. Perhaps it is resting. Perhaps it is finally saying no without resentment. Perhaps it is calling someone you have avoided. Perhaps it is releasing the need to be understood. Perhaps it is sitting quietly for 5 minutes and allowing yourself to exist without solving anything. The source within you does not always speak through dramatic signs. Often, what is deepest arrives quietly. It can appear as the gentle recognition that you are tired of carrying anger. It can appear as the awareness that a role you have performed for years no longer feels true. It can appear as a moment when you realize that pleasing everyone has never actually brought you peace. And then a question emerges. Who would you be if you stopped organizing your life around fear? Not who would you become someday. Who are you beneath it now? Beneath the need for approval, beneath the comparisons, beneath the mistakes you still punish yourself for, beneath the old story of what happened to you, beneath the identity you have spent years defending, there is something there that has never needed defending. You might call it your true self. You might call it spirit, awareness, love, or the presence of the source. The name matters less than the experience. It is the quiet place within you that does not become greater when someone praises you and does not become smaller when someone rejects you. It is the part of you capable of observing fear without becoming fear. And perhaps the divine pattern guiding your life has always been leading you toward that remembrance. The difficult people may reveal where you still surrender your peace. The uncertain seasons may reveal how deeply you depend on control. The endings may reveal what you were afraid to release. Your comparisons may reveal where you have forgotten your own path. Even your resentment may reveal the places within you that are asking to be forgiven and set free. Nothing here requires you to call suffering good. It simply invites you to become curious about what suffering may be showing you. The ocean does not cease to be the ocean because a storm moves across its surface. Beneath the waves there is a depth untouched by the weather above. In much the same way, your circumstances can become turbulent while something deeper within you remains whole. You may have spent years trying to calm every wave before allowing yourself to feel peaceful. Perhaps the invitation is different. Perhaps you are being asked to discover the depth beneath the waves. And when you begin to live from that depth, you may look back at your life differently. Events that once appeared disconnected may begin to reveal a quiet thread. Not a thread promising that everything will happen exactly as you want, but one continually inviting you away from fear and toward love, away from control and toward trust, away from the identity created by the ego and toward the self that was present before the ego began telling its story. You do not need to force yourself to see this pattern. You do not need to manufacture meaning where you cannot yet find any. Some experiences remain mysterious for a very long time. For now, it may be enough to soften one question. Instead of asking, why isn't my life happening the way I planned, you might quietly ask, what is life inviting me to notice here? Then become still enough to listen. Because what you discover may not be an answer about where your life is going. It may be something far more freeing. You may begin to discover who has been walking the path all along. The moment you begin asking what life is inviting you to notice, rather than demanding that life explain itself, something subtle changes within you. You are no longer standing outside the river trying to control its direction. You begin to notice the current. And perhaps for the first time, you also begin to notice how much energy you have spent trying to make that current obey you. This is where the ego becomes important to understand. The ego is not an enemy you need to destroy. It is simply the part of the mind that has learned to define you through separation, comparison, memory, and control. It creates an identity from what you have achieved, what you have lost, what others think of you, what happened in your childhood, what you fear may happen tomorrow, and all the roles you have accumulated along the way. It says, this is who you are because this is what happened to you. Awareness quietly asks, is that all I am? Consider how often your peace depends upon circumstances behaving according to your expectations. You send a message and wait for a reply. 10 minutes pass, then an hour, then several hours. Nothing has actually happened except silence. Yet the mind begins writing a story. Perhaps they are angry. Perhaps I said something wrong. Perhaps they no longer care. Perhaps I am being rejected. Within a short time, your body is reacting not to reality, but to an interpretation of reality. Your heart feels heavy, your thoughts race, you return to the phone again and again, hoping that a small notification will restore the peace that you unknowingly handed away. Then the message finally arrives. Everything is fine. They were simply busy. Notice what happened. The suffering existed largely inside the space between what was happening and what fear imagined was happening. This is one of the ego's favorite places to live, the space of uncertainty. Uncertainty frightens the ego because uncertainty cannot be controlled. So the mind fills the unknown with predictions. And because the ego believes fear will protect you, many of those predictions are painful ones. Yet awareness allows you to witness this process. You can notice yourself checking the phone. You can notice the story forming. You can notice the tightness in your chest. And rather than judging yourself for feeling anxious, you can gently say, there is fear here. That small shift matters. You did not say, I am fear. You recognized there is fear here. The sky does not become the clouds that pass through it. It allows them to appear, change shape, and move on. Your awareness can become something like that sky. Thoughts appear, feelings arise. Memories return, fear moves through. But beneath all of them remains the spaciousness in which they are being noticed. Perhaps this is one of the first glimpses of your true self. The ego will tell you that peace comes when uncertainty disappears. Awareness reveals that peace becomes possible when you no longer require uncertainty to disappear. This does not happen all at once. It is something you begin noticing in ordinary moments. Imagine that someone you care about criticizes you. Perhaps they misunderstand a choice you have made. Immediately, you feel the impulse to explain yourself. You want them to understand your intentions. You want them to see that you are not the person they have decided you are. Sometimes clarification is loving and appropriate, but there are other times when you are not really communicating. You are trying to control another person's perception of you, and that can become exhausting. You explain more, you defend yourself more carefully, you replay the conversation later and imagine better sentences. Yet no amount of explaining guarantees that another person will see you exactly as you wish to be seen. The ego says, I cannot be peaceful until they understand me. Your deeper self whispers, can I understand myself without requiring their agreement? This is not indifference, it is freedom. You can care about another person without making their opinion the foundation of your identity. You can listen to criticism without automatically accepting it as truth. You can examine your own behavior honestly, apologize when an apology is needed, learn what there is to learn, and still refuse to turn someone else's judgment into your inner home. A tree does not ask every person walking past whether it is growing correctly. It receives light. It receives rain. It sends its roots into the earth and follows the intelligence written into its nature. There is something within you that knows how to grow in much the same way. But when you live primarily through comparison, you forget your own roots. Perhaps you have looked at someone your age and wondered why their life seems further along. They have the relationship you wanted, their family seems happier, they appear more confident. Their life looks settled while yours still contains questions. The mind quietly turns their path into evidence against your own. You may even know intellectually that comparison is unhelpful, yet still feel its sting. This happens because the ego loves measurement. It needs a scale on which to decide whether you are enough. Someone must be ahead, someone behind, someone more successful, someone less worthy. Someone admired, someone ignored, but the Spirit does not measure life this way. You would never look at two flowers in a garden and condemn one because it bloomed 3 weeks later than another. You understand instinctively that each flower belongs to its own rhythm. The rose does not become more complete by blooming before the lily. Yet human beings often deny themselves this same kindness. What if your timing is not evidence that something is wrong with you? What if the season you are in contains something you could never discover by living someone else's season? Perhaps the uncertainty you dislike is teaching you to stop outsourcing your sense of direction. Perhaps being alone is showing you where you confuse companionship with completeness. Perhaps watching others move ahead is revealing how deeply you have allowed external milestones to determine your worth. When you begin seeing life this way, comparison becomes more than a painful habit. It becomes a doorway into awareness. You notice where the ego still believes fulfillment exists somewhere outside you? And this is where the divine pattern becomes easier to recognize. The pattern may not be found in the external events themselves. It may be found in what those events continually invite you to awaken from. Again and again, life may bring you to the edge of the same lesson. Perhaps you are a people pleaser. You have learned to keep everyone comfortable. You say yes when something inside you quietly says no. You avoid difficult conversations because disagreement feels dangerous. You become the person others can always rely on, but privately you feel depleted. Then resentment begins to grow. You wonder why people take so much from you. But awareness may reveal a difficult and freeing truth. Sometimes others continue taking because you have been afraid to stop giving. This does not mean blaming yourself. It means seeing the pattern without condemnation. Perhaps long ago, you learned that being agreeable kept you safe. Maybe approval became associated with love. Maybe you discovered that being useful made you feel needed. The pattern had a purpose once. It helped you navigate life, but what protects you in one season can imprison you in another. Now life repeatedly brings you relationships where the same question appears in different forms. Can you remain loving without abandoning yourself? That is a very different question from how can I make everyone happy? Love does not require self-erasure. You can say no with kindness. You can leave a conversation without hatred. You can stop participating in a pattern without turning the other person into an enemy. This is what awareness makes possible. Instead of automatically repeating an old response, you create a small space in which a new response can emerge. And perhaps this small space is where spiritual freedom begins. The ego reacts. Awareness responds. The ego remembers every injury and prepares for the next one. Awareness notices the memory without requiring the present to become the past. The ego says, protect yourself by controlling everything. Awareness asks, what would love do here if fear did not need to be in charge? You may discover how much of your life has been organized around avoiding pain. You try to control relationships because you do not want to experience abandonment. You try to control the future because you fear disappointment. You control how others see you because rejection feels unbearable. You hold tightly to familiar identities because you fear who you might be without them. Control can feel like strength, but underneath it there is often fear. Imagine holding sand tightly in your hand. The harder you squeeze, the more it escapes between your fingers. Your effort to keep it becomes the very thing that prevents you from holding it gently. We sometimes approach life this way. We squeeze relationships, we squeeze plans, we squeeze timing, we squeeze ourselves. We say this must happen and it must happen in this particular way or I cannot be at peace. Then life changes, as life always does, and we suffer twice. First from the change itself, and then from our insistence that the change should never have occurred. There is another possibility. You can have intentions without turning them into demands. You can desire something deeply while remaining open to the possibility that life may unfold differently. You can love someone without possessing them. You can make plans without asking those plans to guarantee your happiness. This is not passivity. You still participate fully in your life. You make choices, you speak, you create, you care. But you stop insisting that your inner peace be the reward you receive only when everything outside you goes according to plan. Think of a sailor on the ocean. The sailor may choose a direction, raise the sails, and learn to navigate carefully, but the sailor cannot command the wind. Wisdom is not controlling the wind. Wisdom is learning how to adjust the sails. Perhaps intention is like choosing your direction, while surrender is accepting that you do not control every current along the way. When you begin living this way, uncertainty changes its meaning. It is no longer merely an empty space where something terrible might happen. It becomes an open space where something you have not imagined may become possible. This is especially important during loss. There are losses that cannot be turned quickly into lessons. Some grief needs no explanation. When someone leaves your life, when a relationship ends, when an era closes, or when aging changes what your body can do, you may not need a spiritual interpretation immediately. You may simply need permission to feel. There is tenderness in allowing grief to be grief. The ego sometimes tries to escape pain by demanding an answer. Why did this happen? But the heart may need a different question. Can I be present with myself while this hurts? Imagine sitting beside someone you love who is grieving. You would not necessarily hand them a philosophy and tell them to stop feeling. You might simply sit beside them. You might listen. You might let your presence say, you do not have to carry this moment alone. Can you offer yourself that same presence? Can you stop abandoning yourself whenever uncomfortable emotions appear? Perhaps the source within you is not asking you to transcend your humanity. Perhaps the invitation is to bring love into your humanity. Sadness can be held in love. Fear can be witnessed in love. Confusion can exist inside a larger field of peace. You do not need to eliminate every difficult emotion before you can be spiritually aligned. Sometimes alignment means allowing yourself to experience what is here without adding judgment. You can say, I am hurting, and I am still whole. I do not know what comes next, and I am still here. I am afraid, and fear does not have to make every decision for me. These are quiet recognitions, but they change the relationship you have with yourself. And when that relationship changes, the pattern of your life often begins to change as well. Not because the world suddenly obeys you, but because you stop bringing the same unconscious self into every experience. Consider someone who has been hurt in a relationship. The relationship ends, but the fear remains. Years later, another person enters their life. This new person has not caused the old wound, yet the old wound begins interpreting everything. A delayed message feels like abandonment. A disagreement feels like rejection. A request for space feels like the beginning of an ending. The past has quietly entered the present wearing different clothes. This is how old identities continue themselves. The ego says, I know what this means because I have seen this before. Awareness says, this moment deserves to be seen as it is. You begin separating memory from reality. You begin noticing when yesterday is speaking through you. And this is not a reason for shame. It is a reason for compassion. The moment you can see a pattern, you are no longer completely trapped inside it. Awareness itself is already the beginning of freedom. Perhaps you have carried an identity such as the one who was abandoned, the one who always fails, the one nobody understands, or the one who must hold everything together. These identities can become strangely familiar. Even when they hurt, they give the ego a story to inhabit. But a story repeated for many years does not become your essence. You are the awareness capable of noticing the story. This is one of the deepest distinctions you can make. Your history happened to you, but your history is not the entirety of you. Your mistakes belong to your experience, but they are not the deepest definition of you. The opinions people formed about you may have affected you, but they do not contain the final truth of who you are. Beneath all of those stories is something quieter. It does not need to prove anything. It does not need to win an argument with the past. It does not need everyone to approve. It simply is. And perhaps every time life unsettles one of your carefully constructed identities, it is not always taking something essential away from you. Sometimes it may be showing you what was never essential in the first place. This can happen as you grow older. A role that once defined you changes. Children grow up. A career ends. Your appearance changes. Your energy shifts. Things that once made you feel important no longer provide the same satisfaction. The ego may interpret this as loss of identity, but another part of you may begin asking a more spacious question. If I am not only my role, my appearance, my achievements, my usefulness, or the approval I receive, then who am I? At first, that question can feel frightening. Eventually, it can become liberating. The older identities begin falling like leaves from a tree, and beneath them you discover that life itself remains. Awareness remains. The capacity to love remains. The ability to be present remains. The connection to source remains. Perhaps you were never meant to spend your entire life protecting an image of yourself. Perhaps you were meant to discover what remains when the image becomes unnecessary. This is why stillness can be so powerful. When you sit quietly without reaching for distraction, you begin hearing the machinery of the ego. You notice how quickly the mind travels into tomorrow. You notice old conversations returning. You notice imaginary arguments. You notice the desire to fix, compare, predict, and control. You do not need to stop these thoughts by force. Simply notice them. A river becomes muddy when you continually stir the bottom. If you stop disturbing the water, the sediment gradually settles by itself. The mind can be similar. You do not create peace by violently demanding silence from yourself. You allow peace by ceasing to participate in every thought that asks for your attention. A thought says, "What if everything goes wrong?" You notice it. Another says, "You are falling behind." You notice that too. Another says, "They should never have treated you that way." You notice the old anger, and beneath all of this, noticing something remains still. That stillness was there before the thought appeared. It remains after the thought passes. Perhaps this is why the deepest guidance in your life often feels quiet. Fear needs urgency. The ego needs drama. But the source does not have to compete for your attention. It waits beneath the noise. And when the noise softens, you may begin to sense something that cannot easily be put into words. Not an instruction telling you exactly what your future will look like. Not a guarantee that nothing difficult will happen. Something simpler. A sense that you do not have to fight life so fiercely. A sense that you can meet this moment. A sense that beneath all the identities you have been protecting, there is a presence within you that has never been lost. And perhaps the divine pattern you have been searching for outside yourself has been revealing this one truth again and again. Every time control fails, you are invited toward trust. Every time comparison hurts, you are invited back to your own path. Every time approval becomes exhausting, you are invited toward inner worth. Every time an old wound reappears, you are invited toward awareness. Every time an identity falls away, you are invited to discover what remains. The pattern does not always remove difficulty. It changes what difficulty can reveal. And slowly, you begin to understand that awakening is not becoming someone extraordinary. It may simply be the gradual release of everything you mistook for who you are. Fear loosens. The need to control softens. Comparison becomes less convincing. The old story loses some of its authority. And in the space that remains, something familiar begins returning. Not a new self, your true self. The self that remembers how to love without possessing, how to care without controlling, how to move through uncertainty without demanding guarantees. But there is still one doorway that many of us hesitate to enter. Because seeing the pattern is one thing. Releasing the past that keeps repeating it is another. And that doorway has a name: forgiveness. Forgiveness is one of those words we often understand intellectually long before we understand it in the heart. You may know that holding resentment hurts you. You may know that the past cannot be changed. You may even have told yourself many times that you have forgiven someone. And yet one memory, one name, one unexpected encounter can bring the old pain rushing back as though no time has passed at all. This does not mean you have failed. Perhaps forgiveness is not a single decision you make once and never revisit. Perhaps it is a gradual willingness to stop asking yesterday to become different. Think about someone who hurt you. Maybe they betrayed your trust. Maybe they left when you needed them. Maybe they spoke words that stayed with you for years. Or perhaps the person you struggle most to forgive is yourself. You return to that moment and ask the same questions. Why did they do this? Why did I allow it? Why didn't I see it sooner? Why wasn't I stronger? The mind believes that if it revisits the scene enough times, it will eventually find a version of the past that does not hurt. But the past does not change when we revisit it. Only our relationship with it can change. Forgiveness does not require you to call harmful behavior acceptable. It does not mean returning to relationships that continually violate your peace. It does not ask you to pretend that something did not matter. Forgiveness is something quieter. It is the moment you begin realizing that you no longer want another person's actions to occupy so much space inside your consciousness. You may still remember. You may still feel sadness. You may still choose distance. But you stop carrying the event everywhere you go. Imagine walking through life holding a burning coal because someone once placed it in your hand. You continue carrying it because putting it down feels as though you are letting them escape responsibility. Yet the person who harmed you may not even know you are still holding it. Your hand is the one being burned. Forgiveness is putting down the coal, not for them, for the peace within you that has waited patiently beneath the pain. And sometimes the heaviest coal is the one we hold against ourselves. Perhaps you made a choice years ago that you would never make today. You trusted someone you now believe you should not have trusted. You stayed too long. You left too soon. You said something you wish you could take back. You ignored what you now recognize as your inner knowing. And somewhere along the way, you created a sentence about yourself. I should have known better. But consider this gently. The person you were then did not possess everything the person you are now has learned. You are judging yesterday's consciousness with today's awareness. What would happen if you replaced judgment with understanding? You do not need to deny responsibility. You can acknowledge what you did. You can repair what can be repaired. You can apologize where an apology belongs. But punishment and responsibility are not the same thing. Endlessly condemning yourself does not heal the past. It only brings the past into another day. A seed does not apologize for the time it spent beneath the soil. Darkness was part of the place from which its growth emerged. It did not know the sunlight before it reached toward it. Perhaps there were seasons when you were living from fear because fear was what you knew. Perhaps you sought approval because you had not yet discovered inner worth. Perhaps you held on to someone because you had not yet learned that love and attachment are different. Perhaps you tried to control everything because surrender felt unsafe. Now you see more. And seeing more is not an invitation to hate who you were. It is an invitation to love that earlier version of yourself with the wisdom you have today. You might imagine sitting beside the person you were 10 years ago. Look at that person without the advantage of hindsight. Notice what they were carrying. Notice what they feared. Notice how desperately they may have wanted to be loved, accepted, safe, or understood. Would you speak to them the way you sometimes speak to yourself now? Or would you become softer? Perhaps you would say, you were doing what you knew how to do. Perhaps you would say, you will understand this differently one day. Perhaps you would simply sit beside them. This tenderness is not weakness. It is one of the ways the past loses its grip. And once you stop fighting the person you used to be, you become more available to the person you are now. This is where surrender begins to take on a deeper meaning. Surrender is sometimes misunderstood as giving up. But spiritual surrender is not resignation. It is not refusing to participate in your own life. It is the release of the demand that reality obey your personal timetable. You still have intentions. You still make choices. You still move toward what feels loving and meaningful. But you leave a little room around your plans. You stop telling the universe, it must happen exactly this way. Imagine planting a seed in a garden. You choose the seed. You prepare the soil. You water it. You place it where sunlight can reach it. Then something extraordinary happens. You wait. You do not dig up the seed every morning to make sure it is growing. You do not shout at the soil because nothing is visible after 3 days. You participate, and then you trust processes you cannot see. There may be parts of your life that are underground right now. You have done what you know to do, yet nothing seems to be changing. Perhaps you are waiting for clarity about your purpose. Perhaps you are healing from a relationship and wondering when your heart will finally feel light again. Perhaps you are entering a new stage of life and cannot yet recognize yourself within it. The ego looks at the empty soil and says, nothing is happening. But how could you know? Some of the deepest changes in you may be invisible before they become visible. You may already be learning how to stop chasing approval. You may already be becoming less reactive. You may already be discovering that solitude is different from loneliness. You may already be releasing a version of yourself that survived by pleasing everyone. These changes rarely arrive with announcements. One day you simply notice that something which used to disturb you no longer has the same power. Someone criticizes you, and instead of spending the entire evening defending yourself in your imagination, you breathe and let their opinion remain theirs. A person does not call, and instead of turning silence into rejection, you return to your own life. An old memory appears, and rather than entering it for another hour, you acknowledge it and allow it to pass. This is growth in its quietest form. You are not becoming someone new. You are removing what kept you from recognizing who you already were. And this is why intention matters. There is a difference between living with intention and living with expectation. Expectation says, I will be peaceful when this happens. Intention says, I choose to bring peace into what is happening. Expectation says, I need this person to love me in the way I imagine. Intention asks, can I become an expression of love without abandoning myself? Expectation attempts to control the future. Intention shapes the consciousness you bring into the present. You may wake in the morning without knowing what the day will bring. Before you reach for your phone, before the voices of the world enter your mind, you can become still for a moment. You might ask yourself, what do I wish to bring into this day? Not what do I want to get? What do I wish to bring? Perhaps patience, perhaps kindness, perhaps honesty, perhaps forgiveness, perhaps a willingness not to react immediately when something challenges you. This changes your relationship with life because you stop approaching every experience as a transaction. You are no longer asking, what will this moment give me? You begin asking, what quality of my deepest self can I bring to this moment? And this is one way of living in harmony with the Source. If you understand Source as love, then alignment with Source is not something mysterious or distant. It becomes visible in how you meet another human being. It appears in your willingness to listen. It appears when you choose not to return cruelty with cruelty. It appears when you refuse to use another person's weakness as a reason to forget your own humanity. This does not mean allowing mistreatment. Love sometimes moves closer. Love sometimes steps away. Love sometimes speaks. Love sometimes remains silent. The important question is not whether your choice makes everyone comfortable. The question is whether your choice comes from fear or from the deepest clarity available to you. Imagine someone repeatedly crossing a boundary. In the past, perhaps you tolerated it because you feared losing them. Eventually, resentment grew, and you became angry not only with them, but with yourself. Then one day, something changes. You recognize that remaining loving does not require remaining available to every behavior. You speak calmly. You do not attack. You do not try to make the other person wrong. You simply honor what you know. Perhaps they understand. Perhaps they do not. But afterward, there is a quietness inside you because you did not betray yourself in order to preserve someone's approval. This too can be part of the divine pattern. The same relationship that once exposed your fear of rejection may eventually teach you the difference between love and self-abandonment. The difficulty was not necessarily sent to punish you. But once it is here, awareness can transform what you learn from it. This is the remarkable thing about consciousness. It can change your relationship with experiences you cannot change. A scar remains a scar, but it no longer needs to be an open wound. The past remains part of your story, but it does not have to remain the author of your future. And when you begin releasing old resentment, you create space. Nature understands space beautifully. A forest does not panic when old leaves fall. Their falling makes room for another season. An empty field does not assume it has lost its purpose because nothing is blooming in winter. The silence of winter is not the death of life. It is another expression of life. Perhaps some empty spaces in your own journey deserve the same trust. We often rush to fill emptiness because emptiness makes the ego uncomfortable. A relationship ends, and we immediately search for another person to remove the loneliness. A role ends, and we rush to create another identity. A dream disappears, and we demand a new purpose immediately. But what if the empty space is not a mistake? What if it is, where you hear yourself again? There are things you can only hear when something else becomes quiet. After years of living for everyone else's expectations, silence may initially feel frightening, but eventually you may begin recognizing your own voice beneath the noise. You discover preferences you had forgotten. You rediscover the pleasure of simply being. You realize that some goals you chased were never truly yours. And slowly, the empty space becomes sacred. You stop asking how quickly you can fill it. You begin asking what it is revealing. This is where trust becomes more than a spiritual idea. Trust becomes a way of walking through the unknown. You do not know what is around the next bend, but you know you can meet yourself there. You do not know whether every relationship will remain, but you know your capacity to love does not disappear when someone leaves. You do not know whether every plan will succeed, but you know your worth is not contained inside an outcome. You do not know how many seasons remain in your life, but you know this breath is here now. There is enormous freedom in this. The future loses some of its power to frighten you when you stop asking it to guarantee your peace. Perhaps you have spent years waiting for life to provide evidence that you are safe enough to relax. When the finances are settled, when the relationship is secure, when the family conflict is resolved, when your health feels predictable, when you know exactly what your purpose is, then you will allow yourself to be at peace. But life rarely gives permanent guarantees. One uncertainty resolves and another eventually appears. If peace depends upon the absence of uncertainty, peace will always remain somewhere in the future. What if you reverse the relationship? What if peace is not what you find after life becomes certain? What if peace is what allows you to walk through uncertainty without losing yourself? The river does not know every rock it will meet on the way to the ocean. It bends, it narrows, it widens. Sometimes it moves rapidly, sometimes almost imperceptibly, yet it continues. There is no humiliation in the river changing direction. It does not say, "My original plan has failed." It responds to what is present. Perhaps your life has changed direction many times. Maybe you once believed you would be somewhere completely different by this age. Perhaps you thought someone would still be beside you. Perhaps you imagined yourself as a different person. There can be grief in recognizing that, but there can also be freedom, because the life you imagined was never the only life through which love could express itself. A changed path does not mean a meaningless path. Sometimes we are so devoted to the picture we created years ago that we fail to notice the life asking to be lived now. You may be standing in a beautiful garden while grieving the garden you thought you would have. Awareness gently brings you back. Here, this breath, this person, this morning, this ordinary cup of tea, this patch of sunlight across the floor, this conversation, this moment in which life is actually happening. The divine pattern is not necessarily hidden somewhere in your future. It may be appearing in the way you are learning to inhabit the present. And when you become present, gratitude begins to arise naturally. Not forced gratitude, not the kind that tells you to deny what hurts. A quieter gratitude. You become grateful for what you once overlooked because you were too busy waiting for something else. You notice the person who has remained beside you. You notice your body carrying you through another day. You notice the sky changing at evening. You notice how much you have survived without becoming incapable of love. You notice that despite everything you have lost, something within you continues reaching toward light. Gratitude does not say, "Everything in my life is perfect." It says, "Even here, something is worthy of my attention." And attention changes experience. Where attention goes, your inner life follows. If you continually attend to what is missing, life begins to feel like absence. If you continually attend to old injuries, the past begins to feel present. But when you gently place attention upon love, beauty, kindness, and the simple fact of being alive, another dimension of the same life becomes visible. Nothing outside may have changed, yet you have changed where you are looking from. This is alignment. It is not manipulating the universe to produce a particular result. It is bringing your inner world into greater harmony with the qualities you recognize as sacred. Love, peace, compassion, forgiveness, generosity, presence. And from this alignment, decisions often become clearer. When fear is loud, every path looks dangerous. When resentment is loud, every person looks suspicious. When comparison is loud, your own path looks inadequate. But when you become still, you begin seeing without so many filters. You may recognize that something you have been forcing is asking to be released. You may recognize that a relationship deserves another honest conversation. You may recognize that you have been waiting for permission to live according to what you already know inwardly. You may recognize that there is nothing you need to solve today. The guidance is often simpler than the ego expects. Perhaps the next step is not a dramatic change. Perhaps it is one sincere apology. One boundary spoken without anger, one evening without replaying the past, one morning spent in silence, one moment in which you choose compassion instead of judgment. A path is made of steps, and the divine pattern may become visible only as you walk it. You cannot stand at the beginning of a maze and understand every turn. You discover the path by moving through it. This is why demanding certainty before you move can keep you frozen. Sometimes clarity follows the step rather than preceding it. You act from the most loving awareness available to you, and then you listen again. You adjust, you learn, you forgive, you continue. And gradually looking backward, you notice something. The moments that seemed to break your identity often brought you closer to what was authentic. The people you could not please taught you that approval was never a reliable home. The plans that failed taught you that your peace could not depend entirely upon outcomes. The loneliness taught you how to sit with yourself. The resentment showed you where forgiveness was needed. The uncertainty taught you to listen. The silence introduced you to a presence beneath thought. And perhaps this is the pattern. Not that everything happened exactly as it was supposed to happen. Not that every wound was necessary, but that love remained available as a response to whatever happened. Awareness remained available. Forgiveness remained available. The source remained available, even when you forgot, especially when you forgot. There may have been times when you believed you had wandered very far from yourself. You became consumed by fear. You chased approval. You stayed in places that diminished you. You became angry. You made choices from pain. Yet the true self was never standing somewhere far away, condemning you. It was beneath the noise, waiting, like the sun behind a sky filled with clouds. The clouds can hide the sun from your sight, but they cannot remove it from the sky. Fear can obscure your peace. Resentment can obscure your love. The ego can obscure your connection to Source. But perhaps none of them can destroy what they temporarily conceal. This changes the spiritual journey entirely. You are not traveling toward worthiness. You are remembering worth. You are not trying to manufacture love. You are releasing what prevents love from moving freely. You are not constructing a new, true self. You are becoming quiet enough to recognize the self that was there before the world told you what you had to be. And this remembering can happen anywhere. It can happen while washing dishes. It can happen during a difficult conversation. It can happen while sitting alone after someone leaves. It can happen while looking into the mirror at a face that has changed with age. You suddenly realize, I am still here. Not merely the personality, not merely the story. The awareness, noticing all of it, the presence that has witnessed every version of you, the child, the frightened young person, the one who tried desperately to belong, the one who made mistakes, the one who loved, the one who lost, the one sitting here now. Something has been present through every chapter, and perhaps that is what you have been searching for. Not the perfect explanation for your life, not proof that everything will unfold according to your wishes, but a recognition that beneath all change there is something within you capable of meeting change with love. When you recognize this, surrender no longer feels like losing control. It begins to feel like returning home. You stop asking life to prove that you are supported. You begin noticing the support already present in consciousness itself. You breathe, you soften, you release one more argument with the past. And perhaps you whisper inwardly, I do not know everything that lies ahead, but I am willing to meet it without abandoning myself. That willingness is enough, because eventually the question changes. You stop asking, what is the divine pattern going to give me? And you begin asking, how can I live in harmony with what I have already discovered? That is where understanding becomes practice. That is where spiritual insight enters an ordinary morning, an ordinary relationship, an ordinary difficult day. And that is where peace stops being something you occasionally feel and begins becoming the place within yourself to which you know how to return. And perhaps this is where the journey becomes beautifully simple. You do not need to withdraw from ordinary life in order to live what you have discovered. You do not need perfect circumstances, complete certainty, or a mind that never becomes afraid again. You simply begin returning again and again to the quiet place within you that remembers. There will still be mornings when you wake with uncertainty. There will still be people who misunderstand you. Plans will change. Relationships will evolve. Your body will continue moving through the seasons of life. There may still be moments when the old fears return and whisper that you are behind, that you have made the wrong choice, or that you need to control what happens next. The difference is that you no longer have to believe every whisper. You can notice the fear and breathe. You can notice the need to control and soften your grip. You can notice resentment returning and ask whether you are ready to release another small part of it. You can notice yourself comparing your life with someone else's and gently remember that no two rivers need to take the same path to reach the sea. This is awareness becoming a way of living. You may begin your morning with a few moments of stillness. Before asking what you need to accomplish, you can simply become aware that you are here. Feel your breath. Notice the quiet before the demands of the day arrive. You do not need to ask the silence for answers. Let the silence remind you that beneath all your thoughts there is a presence that does not need to hurry. Then perhaps you offer one simple intention. May I bring peace into this day. Or, may I respond from love more often than fear. You do not need to perform this perfectly. Intention is not another standard by which to judge yourself. It is simply a direction in which you turn your inner attention. As you move through the day, life will provide opportunities to remember. Someone may irritate you. Instead of immediately reacting, perhaps you allow one breath between what happened and what you do next. That breath may seem insignificant. It is not. Inside that small space, an old pattern can end. You may still speak firmly. You may still disagree. You may still protect a boundary, but you can do it without allowing anger to become your identity. This is what peace can look like in ordinary life. It is not avoiding every conflict. It is refusing to abandon your deepest self whenever conflict appears. And at other times, the practice may simply be gratitude. Not gratitude used to escape sadness, but gratitude that widens your vision. At the end of the day, you might quietly remember 3 ordinary moments that you almost overlooked. Someone smiled at you. The air felt cool against your face. You heard the voice of someone you love. You watched sunlight disappear behind the trees. These moments do not solve every problem. They remind you that your problems are not the entirety of your life. There is still beauty here. There is still love here. There is still life happening while the mind is busy worrying about what has not happened yet. Gratitude brings you back to what is present. Forgiveness brings you back as well. There may be someone you are not ready to forgive completely. You do not have to force yourself. You can begin more gently. You might simply say inwardly, I am willing to stop carrying this pain in the same way. That willingness creates a small opening. Tomorrow, perhaps the opening becomes wider. Forgiveness may happen layer by layer, like winter ice, slowly melting beneath the warmth of a returning sun. You do not need to strike the ice until it breaks. You allow warmth to do what force cannot. And the same kindness can be offered to yourself. When you make another mistake, notice how quickly the old inner voice appears. Then ask whether condemnation is truly necessary for growth. Perhaps you can correct yourself without rejecting yourself. Perhaps you can learn without turning the lesson into a sentence against your worth. You are still learning how to be human. Everyone you meet is doing the same. This recognition can soften judgment. You begin seeing that the impatient person, the controlling person, the person desperate for approval, and the person who pushes others away may all be responding to fears you cannot see. Understanding does not require you to remain close to everyone. It simply frees you from needing hatred in order to create distance. You can bless someone and continue walking. You can love someone and recognize that your paths have separated. You can forgive and still close the door. There is freedom in discovering that love does not always mean holding on. Sometimes love releases, and perhaps this is one of the deepest patterns running through your life. Learning what to hold with care and what to release with grace. The ego wants permanent answers. Life offers seasons. The ego wants guarantees. Life offers presence. The ego wants to know exactly where the river is going. The source within you quietly invites you to become one with the movement of the water. So when you find yourself standing before uncertainty again, perhaps you can remember that you have stood here before. You have lived through days you once believed you could not survive. You have released identities you once thought were permanent. You have discovered strength after moments that made you feel weak. You have watched endings slowly become space for another way of being. This does not mean every uncertainty will lead where you want. It means you no longer need every uncertainty to lead where you want in order to remain connected to yourself. That is inner freedom. You participate in life without trying to possess it. You love without demanding permanence. You intend without forcing. You forgive without forgetting your wisdom. You move forward without needing to condemn the road behind you. And slowly, the divine pattern becomes less like a secret you are trying to decode and more like a way of seeing. You begin noticing that life continually brings you back to the same invitation. Come back from fear. Come back from resentment. Come back from comparison. Come back from the endless argument with what has already happened. Come back to this breath. Come back to love. Come back to yourself. Perhaps this is why you never truly needed to find yourself. The deepest part of you was never missing. It was simply covered by noise, expectation, old pain, identities, and all the ideas you collected about who you were supposed to be. Like the sky behind the clouds, it remained. Like the ocean beneath the waves, it remained. Like the seed beneath winter soil, quietly holding the possibility of spring, it remained. And it remains now. So you do not need to understand the entire pattern tonight. You do not need to know what the next year will bring. You do not need to know who will stay, which doors will open, or how every unfinished part of your story will resolve itself. Perhaps all you need is enough awareness to meet this moment without fighting it, enough forgiveness to stop carrying yesterday into tomorrow, enough trust to take the next step without seeing the entire road, enough love to remember that your worth has never depended upon where the road leads. And when fear returns, as it sometimes will, you can return too. Return to stillness. Return to your breath. Return to gratitude. Return to the quiet awareness behind your thoughts. Return to that place within you where nothing needs to be proven. The more often you return, the more familiar home becomes. Then one day you may look back over the strange landscape of your life and see it differently. You may see the turns you resisted, the people who came and went, the seasons of waiting, the mistakes, the forgiveness, the loneliness, the unexpected joy, and the moments when you thought you had lost your way. Perhaps you will not understand all of it, but perhaps you will smile gently because you finally understand something more important. You were never required to understand every turn. You were invited to remain awake while walking through them, to choose love when fear appeared, to forgive when resentment became too heavy, to release when holding on became suffering, to become still when the world became noisy, to remember the source when the ego told you that you were alone. And through all of this, you were not becoming someone else. You were remembering the peace that was present before you learned to worry about being enough, remembering the love beneath your defenses, remembering the awareness beneath your stories, remembering that the deepest guidance may never have been somewhere outside you. It may have been the quiet presence accompanying you through every season of your life. So wherever you are right now, allow yourself one gentle breath. You do not have to rush toward the next chapter. Be here. Feel the life within you. Let what is finished be finished. Let what is unknown remain unknown for a little while. And trust that when the next step becomes yours to take, you can meet it from the deepest and most loving place within you. Perhaps that is the divine pattern. Not a promise that life will always be easy. Not a guarantee that everything will happen according to your plans. But an invitation appearing again and again to return from fear to love, from resistance to acceptance, from separation to source, and from the person you thought you had to become to the person you have quietly been all along. If something in this journey reminded you of a pattern in your own life, you are welcome to share that reflection in the comments. Sometimes giving words to what we have discovered helps us see it more clearly, and sometimes another person recognizes a piece of their own journey in our reflection. And if these quiet conversations help you return to yourself, you can subscribe and continue walking with us through future journeys of awareness, forgiveness, peace, and spiritual remembrance. Until then, move gently through your life. You do not need to force the river. You do not need to chase the light. Become still enough to notice that the river is already moving, the light is already here, and somewhere beneath all the noise, you already carry the wisdom you have been searching for.